For more on the story, we're joined now by our senior politics reporter, Ziyanda Ngcobo. Ziyanda, a very good afternoon to you. If you could update us as to where we are regarding this particular march.
A very good afternoon to you, Tommy. Well, you don't see me on shot at the moment, but what you are seeing are live visuals of the cliche, a sea of red walking on Francis Bard Street here in Tshwane. In front you will see EFF leader Julius Malema, his deputy president Floyd Shivambu, seeing Veronica Mente, as well as other artists who are also in the front line marching for the immediate release of the Sputnik and the Sinovac vaccines. You'll see the white gold shirts. Those are members of the ATM, the African Transformation Movement, who've joined this march here today. You can see that I think it would be safe to say that there are now thousands of EFF supporters who've come out here today to march to the Health Regulatory Authority, demanding for those vaccines to be released. But we know, Tammy, that SAHPRA has said in numerous statements, at least 3 statements, that one, they are still analyzing the data that has been given to them. Initially, Russia and China weren't as forthcoming with the data in terms of the contents of the vaccine, the efficiency of the vaccine, and the quality of the vaccines. And we know that the J&J vaccine, as well as Pfizer and AstraZeneca, have been some of the vaccines that have been dispensed to citizens across the country. However, we also heard from Acting Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, saying to us yesterday, Tammy, that the issue of the vaccines, it's in the final stages, in particular when it comes to the Sinovac and Sputnik vaccines. And so they wanted to dispel then this what they've described as a conspiracy, that the South African government does not want vaccines from Russia or China. So I tell you what, Tammy, before this march got underway, Malema addressed then those who've come out today, asking them to be disciplined, to walk in an orderly fashion, to wear their masks at all times. But of course, then we know there have also been concerns and criticism leveled against the EFF for actually calling for this particular demonstration in the midst of a third wave that is particularly gripping Gauteng. We are the epicenter of the country, Tammy, and so Malema is saying that if they don't do something now, then we'll have to wait for the 4th vaccine, saying that those who've come out today are fighting for the lives of all. And so this is also a sacrifice that they are making on behalf of many citizens of this country as a result of that lethargic and slow vaccine rollout program.
And one thing that you mentioned there, Ziyanda, is the presence of the African Transformation Movement. Malema did try and make this more about the citizens of the country, as opposed to it being a party-centric approach to the opening up of vaccines. Talk to us about that.
Absolutely. So this isn't an EFF march, it's an EFF-led protest. So they called on all South Africans to join the EFF in this march. They called civil society, non-profit organizations, artists, and even leaders of other political formations, hence the presence of ATM, to join in this particular demonstration because of the importance of vaccines. I think also another point that the EFF leader touched on is that vaccine fatigue, saying that we can't go on another lockdown when the government itself has not also ensured the safety of its citizens by actually releasing those vaccines. However, I mean, you know, we could also talk about the timing of this particular demonstration. You know, some would argue that knowing the leader of the EFF and how politically astute he is at times, that knowing that the vaccines are in the last phase of being assessed, that being Sputnik and Sinovac, having this march just before that, by the time they do come out, it could be read as a victory. But also, we are in a year where local government elections are meant to take place, Tammy, so we can't separate the politics of this. And knowing that there have been strict regulations that have been put down. This is also an opportunity for the EFF to continue capturing the imagination of South Africa's youth. This is an opportunity to reach out to their possible constituencies, and so we know then that this is a march that affects everyone, Tammy, and that's exactly what the EFF leader is trying to do here. But on the other hand, Tammy, I must also reflect then the statement that was released by SAHPRA yesterday is saying that the EFF, without evidence, has accused SAHPRA of disallowing the Sputnik and Sinovac vaccines, and because SAHPRA is captured, controlled by the West pharmaceutical establishment and used by politicians and major capitalist interests. Now, they've said that this is reckless rhetoric, which echoes similar attacks that other political formations such as AfriForum lodged against them during that time, Tammy, when you remember that there were calls for ivermectin to be released out onto the market as a protective measure against COVID-19. I think one of the critical arguments that SAHPRA has also made is that while Sinovac and Sputnik have been dispensed in countries around the world, that was for the initial strand of COVID-19, the one that broke out in Wuhan. We are dealing with a different strand here in South Africa. We're dealing with the SARS-CoV-2 strand, and which is why then they've said they need to be very particular about how they go about this. They're a regulatory body, and in fact that statement from last night, Tammy, is not just from SAHPRA, but it's from, the Faculty of Health Sciences at WITS, it's the South African Medical Research Council, it's the South African HIV Clinician Society, the South African Medical Association, and so it goes. There are at least 10 organizations that have signed to the statement describing today's action as really reckless and unwarranted. Another issue that the EFF has raised, Tammy, is that of the chairperson of the SAHPRA board, Helen Rees. They're saying that she must step down as the chairperson of this board by virtue of the fact that they are saying her husband is actually a shareholder in Aspen, and we know that Aspen also is one of the partners with the Johnson & Johnson Institute, which is of course then dispensing vaccines. So are South Africans frustrated, Tammy? Absolutely. Is this action warranted? Well, you know that there are differing views then about the kind of action that the EFF has taken. Has the vaccine rollout program frustrated South Africans amidst calls for tighter restrictions in Gauteng? I would probably say so too, Tammy. And so here we are on Francis Bart Street. We are now turning, and we are bound then for the SAHPRA offices, where we're expecting the EFF to hand over a memorandum of understanding. They're giving the regulatory authority 7 days to respond then to their demands. Otherwise, they are planning to roll out mass action according to the Red Berets.
I must say, Ziyanda, one of the allegations against SAHPRA, and I guess more specifically against the chair of SAHPRA, Helen Rees, is, as you've mentioned, her husband, Faisal Randera, being a shareholder in Aspen, which is partnered with Johnson & Johnson, which is partnered with Bill Gates. And EFF is saying that what government is doing is that they're prioritizing private interests. What is the response that has been received from Helen Rees regarding these allegations? I know SAHPRA themselves have not been wanting to speak on her behalf.
Absolutely. We had the SAHPRA CEO on air earlier on this week, where she distanced herself, or I should say she would not be drawn into making comments on those direct accusations and the call made by the EFF. What she did do, however, was to actually speak on the process that SAHPRA undergoes when assessing vaccines and their presence in the country. I mean, they have a particular process called the rolling review process, Tammy, and that was for emergency applications. You know that the EFF has been saying that they, within 48 hours, as per this emergency application process, the SAHPRA should have already, a long time ago, released the vaccines. Now, what we do know, according to SAHPRA, is that these two particular countries did not make an application to the country, and when they did, they weren't as forthcoming with the data that is necessary to assess whether or not this particular vaccine is safe to be used in the country. And so when we hear these calls for Helen Rees to step down, I think SAHPRA has tried not to be drawn into the politics of it all. Hence their call to be protected from political parties and to be given the space to operate as an independent a body, which is of course meant to assess then the quality of these products. They're seeing this as an attack on the institution. And so you know, to go back to that rolling review process, it deals with the submission of this data. And so they're saying that China and Russia did not do this. Interesting, Tammy, of course, because China and Russia form part of BRICS, and this is also another sub-theme, I suppose, of the arguments that are being lodged by the EFF to say we are part of this formation. South-South relations should have already seen Russia and China being one of the first to be prioritized when it comes to receiving particular vaccines. Tammy, I just want to pause there because I want to actually just allow the viewer to take in these visuals. Thousands of EFF supporters. We've just turned the corner, and to my right, you'll be able to see some buses that have been assembled. You'll also see some South African police service officials. I must say, these are the first few that I've seen since this morning, because where we were initially when I was broadcasting from the end point where there's going to be a brief, we didn't really spot the police there, but we saw members of the DOR from the EFF there. That stands for the Defenders of the Revolution. And why I'm making this particular point, Tammy, is because with this debate about whether or not we're going to go onto a harder lockdown, the issue that has been raised is that it's not necessarily that we need to have a harder lockdown, but actually enforcement needs to actually be done appropriately. So ensuring that there's greater police visibility, enforcing the curfews, ensuring that restaurants, shebeens, taverns and other establishments actually adhere then to the regulations. Yesterday, Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula as well as Gauteng Premier David Makhura saying then that they cannot afford, the country cannot afford to go on a hard lockdown, but the challenge, however, remains then the issue of enforcement. And so when we speak of enforcement and seeing very little to no a TMPD, that's the Tshwane Metro Police Department, as well as the SAPS, it also speaks to this very issue, Tammy. I would say that they are definitely outnumbered by the crowds here. And if we're speaking enforcement, we should have surely seen SAPS at the very least trying to enforce social distancing. But of course, as you can see with this large crowd, that this is almost impossible.
The sea of red, or the Red Sea before you there, Ziyanda. You mentioned a little bit earlier on how SAHPRA has insisted that they're going to focus only on the science, that they don't want to be swayed by politics or any other factor. But a really difficult position and standpoint for them to take, considering the business entanglements, if one may call them that exist regarding the chairman and the business interests there. So that really, I think, in some way does compromise their argument. That's Ziyanda Ngcobo, who is covering the live EFF march to SAHPRA along with Malungelo Boy. We'll touch base with Malungelo Boy as well in just a moment. He has been with us also right from the beginning of this march.